2003 American Society for Laser Medicine and Surgery presents Leon Goldman Memorial Award, a work in progress. We now join this presentation. Views expressed and materials presented throughout the annual meeting, whether during scientific sessions, instructional courses, or otherwise, represent the personal views of the individual participants and do not represent the opinion of the American Society for Laser Medicine and Surgery. This organization assumes no responsibility for the content of presentations made by individual participants or group of participants. We now join this presentation.
I want to welcome you to the 23rd Annual ASLMS meeting. Many of you have braved orange level or code 4 security at airports and the SARS epidemic, especially from Asia, to come to the meeting. I believe you'll find your efforts well rewarded. We put together a truly multidisciplinary meeting, and I would encourage you to look into some of the other scientific sessions other than those in your specialty to gain insight and ideas that could be taken back to your own specialty. This has often been one of the most productive ways to advance developments in laser medicine. The plenary sessions will feature speakers who are world-renowned laser scientists and clinicians. The breakout sessions will present the latest advances across the spectrum from basic science to clinical applications. The expert panels have been strategically placed within the breakout sessions to discuss current practice as well as putting the latest research in each topic in context with clinical practice. I want to especially invite you to check out the new video sessions organized by Dr. Beisman during the lunch hour today and tomorrow. This is something that's new for the meeting, and I certainly would look forward to hearing your feedback about that session. In developing this meeting, we took your suggestions and constructive criticisms to heart and made changes to take them into account for this meeting. To keep future meetings at a high level of excellence, it is very important for you to fill out the CME evaluations and be brutally honest in your assessment. And any constructive criticism especially is also very welcome. I do have one announcement because we had some problems yesterday about this. There is absolutely no audio, video, or still photography to be done in any of the scientific or educational sessions. Strictly prohibited. If you do want a record from the meeting, you can purchase the audio cassettes near the registration desk. The technical exhibits have a slew of new lasers and related devices on display, and I would encourage you to visit the exhibits and see and play with all the new toys available out there. We want to thank those who have provided significant financial support to make this conference possible, especially the Whitaker Foundation and the U.S. Air Force of Scientific Research, who funded many graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. And I want to personally thank Dr. Kilmer for all her help, and the ASLMS staff, specifically Diane Dalsky and Michelle Wickersham, for doing an outstanding job in putting the meeting together and making my job very easy. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Thank you, George. Really, it has to be obvious to everybody here, I hope, that this is an outstanding meeting, and the person who really did it all was George. I had some ideas. He implemented them all. He's an incredibly organized person. They always say when you're running something, you surround yourself with people who can do the job, and George, you've done a fabulous job. Thank you very much. Yes. And as for me, you can't do this job without having the staff. And the staff, for those of you who don't realize what happens behind the scenes, it's amazing. They take care of us very well. Diane and Michelle especially, Jane and Karen, thank you very much. And we're going to move on to our first speaker. I think Dr. Ken Arndt probably doesn't need any introduction at all. Everybody here must know him. He's been on almost every committee, I think, for this organization. He's been a section chair 3 times. He's a past president. He's contributed in numerous presentations to our society and looked at innovative techniques. He is the clinical professor for Yale, at Yale, Dartmouth, and Harvard. He's the editor for Archives of Dermatology, which is one of our most prestigious dermatology journals, and he's been doing that for forever, I think. but not quite as long as he has been in lasers. I think he's, and the argon lasers were the lasers of choice, if not the only ones out there. It is with my pleasure to welcome Ken Arndt to come up and give his talk, A Work in Progress. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Kilmer, Dr. Haruza, friends and colleagues, I'm honored to have been selected to receive the Leon Goldman Memorial Award and would like to thank the committee and the society for this high honor. Some people say that timing is everything. On reflecting on my life with lasers, it is clear that I've had the great good fortune to have caught the wave. It often seems that I've been in the right places at the right times, and have had the opportunity to be exposed to and work with skilled colleagues, fascinating characters, and great minds, both in my own community and around the world. I'd like to spend a few minutes with you reflecting and reminiscing on where I've been and what I've seen and done. I left Berkeley, California at the end of my third year of college, headed for Yale, having never been to the East Coast before, and thought I was probably going to head back to California to practice some sort of medicine yet to be determined. In July 1960, about 43 years ago, when I was a third-year medical student in New Haven, working in the laboratory trying my hand at some sort of research, T.H. Mayman at the Hughes Aircraft Research Laboratories fired the first laser. The brilliant, coherent red light of a ruby laser at 694.4 nanometers. I was totally unaware of this fact at the time, concentrating on surviving medical school and following that my medical internship in New Haven. I'll be referring to many friends and colleagues throughout this talk, and will be specifically using two of them as reference points, both previous recipients of the Leon Goldman Award. At the time of the first laser light, when I was in Connecticut, my friend Rox Anderson was a fifth grade student in Atlanta, Georgia. So imagine, here's Rox Anderson, a boy from the Midwest, Illinois, without a Southern accent, who survived being driven around in the South at the time of the great civil rights struggles, in a car with Illinois plates reading Land of Lincoln. And at about the same time, my friend Jeff Dover was a 3-year-old little boy growing up in Ottawa, Canada. After 5 years in New Haven, I moved to Boston, looking forward to training in dermatology and a new, exciting, hopefully saner life. But then, as now, there was a war ongoing. In order to be accepted to a training program, I had to commit to military service before any program would accept me. Dermatology residency over, therefore, I've moved my life and my family to Cincinnati to spend 2 years in an occupational health, public health facility there. And who was in Cincinnati but Leon Goldman, often referred to as the father of laser medicine, and the person for whom this award is made. And he was the chairman of the dermatology department of the University of Cincinnati. For 2 years then, 1965 to 67, I spent as much time as I could at the University of Cincinnati and with Dr. Goldman, as he just happened to be developing lasers. Dr. Goldman's lasers laboratories were up and running, and I well remember him demonstrating to me the use of lasers on pigmented lesions in animals and on vegetables. He was, as always, incredibly curious, energetic, hyperactive, and an exciting person to be around. This picture shows the Department of Dermatology at the University of Cincinnati during that period of time. Do we have a pointer? Dr. Goldman is in the center. Dr. Daniel Richfield is to his left. And I am to Dr. Richfield's left, although I can barely recognize myself. And when showing this picture to friends, colleagues, and people in the office, they cannot recognize me whatsoever. Service over, I was given the opportunity to return to Boston to work at what is now the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and Harvard Medical School. At that time, with a one-person department at the Beth Israel Hospital, this was but a tiny part of the Harvard Dermatology Educational Program that was located outside of the Massachusetts General Hospital. I was one of only 2 dermatologists, Erwin Friedberg being my chief and teacher and recruiter. Our lives were those of physicians in an academic medical center involved with research, teaching, and the delivery of medical dermatology. There were no lasers, and there were very few procedural activities ongoing. Much of what is done, known about, and the type of care delivered now on a daily basis simply did not exist. At the time I returned to Boston, Jeff was 10 years old. He remembers tearing a ligament early that winter, being casted, and when the cast was removed, as you might expect, going skiing immediately and breaking his leg. So he didn't get to go to Expo 67 in Montreal that year, although as it happens, we did, leaving our 4 dogs in the care of Dr. Friedberg and his tolerant wife. In the early and mid-70s, Rox was running a camp in New Hampshire, which was a full-time, year-round job. Rox had met John Parrish in 1971, worked with him briefly in 1974, but not till 1977 did he start devoting himself to full-time laboratory investigative work. By then, Jeff was a first medical student. Around the same period of time, a young plastic surgeon who had recently come back to Boston was at the Beth Israel and called. He wanted to sit down and talk about some exciting ideas that he had. This person, Joel No, had just completed his plastic surgical residency at Stanford. He'd been encouraged by Bob Goldman, chairman of the plastic surgery department, to explore his interest using lasers. He was looking for a dermatologist with whom to do this and set up a collaborative group to investigate this interesting new technology. I was not impressed initially, but Joel intrigued me with his intensity and his enthusiasm. Here again, timing and good fortune came into play. Joel's energy and personality eventually got my attention, and we started a cutaneous laser unit involving plastic surgeons, dermatologists, nurses, pathologists, and psychologists. We are interested in the use and effects of lasers on the skin and on patients with laser-responsive cutaneous disease. One has to realize that all those years ago, this was a new idea, somewhat radical, particularly for Boston. Thus, it was not going to add any luster to my CV, get me promoted, or increase my value in the academic medical world. Over the next several years, we saw many interesting patients and were able to bring about some very positive results using the lasers then available, which, as Suzanne noted, were principally the continuous wave carbon dioxide laser and the argon laser. Here are a few images from my collection of slides from those years. This slide is I often used when opening a lecture at that time, which is from the 1982 cover of Life magazine showing healing with light, laser medicine. And this has come true. This is where we are. It's using, looks like either a Heaney or an LED, and it's come to pass. This was our desktop argon laser. And if you think lasers are big now, this was an immovable object hooked up to the wall with plumbing, but it worked. What it worked for were port wine stains. This is a patient of Joel No's showing a test spot. This was previously basically an untreatable lesion. These were test spots were put on. The port wine stain extends up onto the forehead covered by makeup, but following test spots in various sites, patients were then treated, and many had indeed quite positive results. This is a patient of mine before and some months later showing a result which one doesn't have to make any excuses about. He came back with a couple of vascular ectasias, which are these little white areas which are treated. The argon laser could be treated at very short pulses, like 100 milliseconds, so we're close to having some specificity for these lesions. This is a patient with the Klippel-Trenaunay-Weber syndrome and a vascular malformation. Me at the time treating him with an argon laser, and the very nice result without textural change that was seen. This is a patient of Joel's whom he saw with a red nose. And the patient had a rhinoplasty. He did a test spot, which one can't see here. He then treated the patient with the argon laser, getting an excellent result. And then recognizing that this was some sort of new syndrome, and then subsequently writing with colleagues an article defining this post-rhinoplasty red nose syndrome, which is indeed seen, and it's seen after any type of trauma to the nose. A low percentage will develop these telangiectatic lesions which respond nicely. This is a patient whom I saw, I don't know if you can read the date, it's 1979, adenoma sebaceum, a 13-year-old boy, was treated with the argon laser, each individual little spot. This is a few months later, showing they totally disappeared, no textural change. This and other patients who were treated with the argon laser later wrote up and discussing argon laser of small cutaneous vascular lesions and first describing the use of these lasers for such lesions. The carbon dioxide laser was used as well. This is a patient from Joel's collection showing that the CO2 used in cutting in coagulative mode could bring about amazing results. Could be used on adenoma sebaceum, as a patient of mine, with collagenous plaques. And on tattoos, not a bad result. Very little atrophy, very little hypopigmentation, and we can't do too much better than this often today. While there was language to describe the use of lasers in physics and other fields, it was not terminology at that time well known or even known at all to clinicians. We clearly needed a glossary, and in one of our early articles published, we defined the basic concepts and nomenclature of laser therapy so that we could all speak the same language, treat patients, and carry out clinical trials together in a rational fashion. Our laser unit had monthly meetings to discuss clinical care, research, problems, and ideas, and ROCs often attended these small conferences. Some of our inquiries concerned argon laser port wine stain interaction, healing of port wine stains after laser therapy, clinical and histologic variations of vascular malformations, and why adults with port wine stains did relatively well, and children with port wine stains had a higher incidence of scarring. Stimulated by our puzzling about how to do things better, as well as by the results of some clinical pathologic findings, Rox remembers while going home after one of our meetings on the Red Line MBTA train in Boston, he began to muse about how to selectively damage blood vessels. And this was about 25 years ago. He spoke to John Parrish about this, and they began to investigate that problem. Later, Rox, along with Horace Furumoto, worked in some dim garage in Waltham with oil on the floor and put together the first pulse dye laser, taking care at the time not to get electrocuted. In 1979, Joel and I thought it would be useful to try and let others know about this promising and emerging technology, so we established what I believe was the first postgraduate course on lasers in the skin, run through the Harvard Medical School Department of Continuing Medical Education and called Argon Lasers and Cutaneous Vascular Disease. 2 years later, in 1981, we gave the second in this series of courses, the title of which was broadened to Cutaneous Laser Therapy. During these 2 years, much had changed, and we were interested in sharing what we were learning and wished to do so in a broader fashion. Jointly with Joel Noe and Seymour Rosen, participants from the second course and contributors, I was able to put together our first book about lasers in the skin called Cutaneous Laser Therapy, Principles and Methods. Speakers at this course and contributors to the book included Leon Goldman, Phil Balin, and John Dixon, who was the third president of this society. John Parrish and Rox contributed a chapter called Considerations of Selectivity in Laser Therapy, in which they described the principles of selectivity. Remember, this was 1981, and it was at least 2 years prior to their landmark article in Science, which described selective photothermolysis in definitive terms. But it was the same year they published their first article on this topic in Volume 1 of the new journal, Lasers in Surgery and Medicine. These groundbreaking concepts entirely changed the field of laser photomedicine. Our two first postgraduate courses began a series of educational adventures, courses, seminars, and symposia which continue to this day. These activities were not anything I would have imagined at the beginning of my residency 12 years previously. Let yourself think back to 1979 when we had our first course, to what parts of medicine you found interesting and appealing, and then where you were in your life. By another stroke of good luck in 1985, an appealing young physician became a fellow in the combined laser and photomedicine training program run jointly by the Wellman Laboratories and our department. and Jeff Dover and I began to work together in a collaborative fashion that goes on to this day. We continued the tradition of training young physicians. And this picture shows Jeff Dover on the right, Deidre O'Hare on the left, me in the back, our first fellow, Sanjeev Goyal, and our patient for the day in the center in our laser unit at that time. Joel died way too young at the age of 48. Thereafter, Jeff and I continued to give the annual laser course renamed the Joel Imno Memorial Course, Current Concepts in Cutaneous Laser Therapy, the last of which was the 21st annual course. While Joel was alive, we had all planned to put together two books. Book number 1, A Pragmatic Guide to the Use of Lasers, and book number 2, a more detailed and extensive text. Jeff took the lead in putting together book number 1, Illustrated Cutaneous Laser Surgery, a practitioner's guide with co-authors Roy Geronimus, Suzanne Olbricht, Joel, and Rob Stern. This was published in 1989, and in its second edition, published in 2002, again with co-authors Roy Geronimus and Mabet Alora. We dedicated this book to Joel Noh and to many of you in the audience, to all our colleagues whose enthusiasm, ingenuity, commitment to teaching and research have led to the advancement of the art and science of laser photomedicine. This followed the example and returned the compliment of Mitch Goldman and Dick Fitzpatrick, who stated in the dedication of their 1994 book, Cutaneous Laser Surgery, to our colleagues and mentors who provided us with inspiration, encouragement, enlightenment and times, and support. Jeff and I organized the effort bringing together book number 2, Lasers in Cutaneous and Aesthetic Surgery, published in 1997. My friend Roy Geronimus is the co-author of the first book in both editions and acted as associate director of our annual course for many years. In the early 90s, Milton Wainer initiated the Controversies in Cutaneous Laser Surgery Symposium, held initially at Snowmass during the summertime. Jeff and I have jointly co-directed this symposium each summer for more than a decade, with Rox Anderson as the associate director. This flyer is from the 1995 course in Bermuda. I think this was the hurricane course. And it really is that beautiful there. But one has to wear local attire. And this slide shows the 3 course directors of that symposium, Milton Wainer, Jeff, and myself. We gave a prize for the best dressed person, and Tom McMeekin was the winner at that meeting. And from this continuing enterprise, another book emerged. This came out last year, and it reflected the symposium held at Beaver Creek. Well, I'd be remiss not to mention more about this Laser Society. In the same year as our first course, in 1979, Leon Goldman and Elliot Drake and William Mark established the American Society for Laser Medicine and Surgery. And in the year of our second course, 22 years ago in 1981, there was the initial organizational meeting of this society with 130 registrants in San Diego. The society has grown rapidly. As we can see, the attendance is one log scale greater at this meeting than the original meeting, and began to attract some of the best and brightest minds interested in procedural techniques. Now, if you've been following my talk, you will realize that I in no way cast myself as a visionary. I've had the extraordinary good fortune of being around during the right years, in the right settings, and with the right people, and I've been able to be involved with and part of the evolution of lasers as they've emerged in medicine and surgery. Along the way, I've become so intrigued by this field that I've made it an area, a major focus of my career, ending up with a stack of books and articles, learning very much as I went along, and hopefully continuing to do so. So where are we now, and where are we going to go from this point on? I see much more dramatic, intense, and widespread interest in the acceptance and use of all kinds of energy sources on the skin and on other tissues, from lasers to broadband light sources to non-thermal light-emitting diodes to radio frequency devices, and who knows what else. Learning begets learning, and discoveries beget discoveries. We have a large number of interested and bright people in multiple specialties and in the medical laser industry rapidly pushing this field forward. Initially, lasers in dermatology and plastic surgery were used for medical problems. Some of these had aesthetic reflections, such as in patients with vascular malformations and hemangiomas. The primary interest was in using lasers for non-appearance related disorders. We now understand that we can alter tissue within the skin, leaving the surface wrapping intact. And we currently focus much of our attention on aesthetic concerns. We've been able to change not only the face of medicine, but the faces and appearance of the patients whom we treat. All this has grown from a technology that didn't exist when I entered medical school to the field of laser medicine and surgery that didn't exist when I finished training 7 years later, and I'm sure there are things ahead of us which we can barely imagine. We need to look at all of this with new eyes and a beginner's mind open to all possibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that outstanding talk. Stay right there. As you can see, the Leon Goldman Award was very appropriately given to Ken Arndt. It is, by definition, to be given to the speaker who has demonstrated longitudinal excellence throughout their career in performing clinical laser research, providing high-quality laser services to patients, and educating others in the medical laser application. The individual must also share the characteristics of honesty, high ethical standards, and a dedication to patients that were possessed by his namesake. Dr. Ken Arndt has absolutely fills this criteria. For those of you who didn't know Leon Goldman, he was an amazing man. He was the beginning of how lasers were. To the very end, he just recently passed away a couple years ago, would come up to the microphone, and if I had given a talk, he'd be coming up and like, oh God, what didn't I say in my talk? And he would come up and he would ask the one question that I hadn't exactly addressed. It was never antagonistic. It was to just find out the bottom line, what's really going on with laser tissue interaction. Ken Arndt, thank you so much for also being a part of this field. And for you, we have a plaque and money.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.